conference today, postponed, of course, by the blasted virus. Over the next hour, we'll be thinking about zero carbon. What does it really mean? My name's Mark Easton. I'm delighted to be chairing this session for the next hour, and in the company of course, a brilliant panel overflowing with expertise and wisdom. I'm joined by Andy Sutton, who's the Director of Design and Innovation at Cero Homes, a Cardiff-based company which claims to build only true zero carbon homes. Andy is an architect by profession who's designed a collaborative venture involving nearly 30 social landlords in Wales and beyond to deliver something called the Optimised Retrofit Pathfinder. I'm sure all will be explained. Sarah Schofield is Director of Customers and Communities at ADRA, the largest social housing provider in North Wales, a chartered member of the Institute of Environmental Health. Sarah is also fluent in Welsh, and she will be answering all questions in both languages. Emma Harvey is Programme Director at the Green Finance Institute, where she leads the Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings, working with industry to speed up the decarbonisation programme, and that's going to be quite a challenge. And another Sarah joins us. Sarah Davey is Head of Development at CHIC with 16 years of experience in project management in the construction industry, and currently the lead contact for CHIC's new build services product, Build Smart, specifically promoting off-site manufacture and turnkey contractors. So welcome to our panel. Please, everyone involved in this session today, and I can see we've got a very good crowd. How many have we got? Oh, 52. Very good indeed. Do please put all your questions to our experts on the Q&A feature. We'll attempt to get your answers to them as part of this webinar. If not, we'll certainly be ensuring that they take notice of them afterwards. If you want your question to go to a particular panelist, just let me know. I should tell you that a video recording of this session and all today's webinars will be available to download from the CHIC website very soon, along with all the presentational material from all the panels. And of course, do note that Wednesday, the 17th of November is confirmed as the day of the 10th annual CHIC conference. Bookings are now open on the website. Imagine a conference in the real world where you can actually meet real people. I can hardly wait. So the climate change challenge has been issued. All social landlord homes must be at minimum EPC rating of C by 2030 and net zero carbon by 2050. And I know the sector's been responding positively to the need to both retrofit and construct new homes to meet those demanding targets. But do we really understand the full implications of the challenge? Each of our panelists is going to do a short presentation, after which we will have an opportunity for questions. So let's start with Andy Sutton from Cero Homes. Over to you.
Thank you, and hopefully this will pop up on screen, so that should now be sharing. I've got a thoroughly ridiculous number of slides to rattle through in a 10-minute slot, but as Mark has already said, the slides will be shared and people can flick through at a slightly more leisurely pace and interrogate points as we go. So what I will do is do a canter through what is net zero and how we're delivering that. So briefly covering what net zero is by definition, what we're looking at by way of current schemes in terms of how you might be measuring the metrics of net zero. And then at the end, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, I'll run through what we see about where net zero looks like in practical terms for the fabric and systems within a building. So hopefully that keeps you interested through the whole 10-minute slot. I won't dwell, so I'll click through slides. As I said, there's quite a lot here, so I'll click through some of them quickly, but in essence, we have a legal obligation to deliver net zero by 2050. That's across all sectors of the industry, and we have to do that. It was upgraded in 2017 to 100% from the 80% that was in the Climate Change Act of 2008. There are lots of different definitions of net zero, and developers especially are quite prone to using ones which are favourable to their needs, but the best definition that we're aware of is published by the UK Green Building Council. You can see on the screen there the reference document, and for those, when you get the slides through, there's a live link that takes you to the net zero carbon buildings framework definition. That breaks zero carbon into 2 primary types. There's operational zero carbon and there's construction zero carbon. And collectively, they make the whole life net zero carbon. Carbon is defined as CO2, technically CO2 equivalent, and that covers carbon emissions into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases converted into their term of the impact in carbon terms. And it's net zero by the UK green building definition is measured in carbon. That's an important point to pick up later. Across the life of the property, whole life carbon is measured across the whole life of the property. So that's from construction through the operation, and then fairly obviously constructional carbon measured during construction. So that embodies energy carbon emissions used from the development of the products and the construction activities. And then operational carbon is effectively from the point that the building is practically completed, handed over, occupied and operated. Whole life will also pick up deconstruction, but there are various metrics around that at the end. To achieve net zero, you have to be net zero over the course of, typically measured for operational over the course of a year. That would be an average year. So you are allowed to emit carbon over winter and absorb carbon over summer or similar metrics, so long as over the course of an annual period that you are net zero or lower. Construction carbon is something which is picked up from the emissions on site. It's a lot less developed in terms of it, so I'm not going to dwell on it in this presentation, but we've got a little bit on the slides there around how that can be picked up. Operational carbon is the point that's perhaps most developed, and this is where the Green Building Council defined that as the amount of carbon emissions associated with the building's operational energy being zero or negative. So that's the one that we are focusing on a bit more today. It's more developed, there are better metrics available to understand it, and we're better able to deliver it at the moment. Construction carbon with the embodied carbon from products and the operations on site is a harder nut to crack, although of course we must crack it. So the basic definition there, it's a legal obligation, regardless of whether, I think there are still a few people out there that don't quite believe there's a climate emergency on, but even for those, it's a legal obligation. So we're on this journey, like it or not. The operational carbon emissions, what we've historically forgotten is that we live in a national grid world. We have a connection across the UK that powers through gas and through electricity many of our homes. We feed renewables into the electricity network and we draw electricity out from in our homes. What we currently don't take into account when we talk about zero carbon in properties is the fact that we are connected to an energy network or energy networks quite often. So the point that I wanted to pull through in this quick chat is the explanation of how that's important when you're understanding what net zero is. Critical here is the electricity network. So all energy networks have a slightly different carbon emission factor depending on when the energy is drawn from the grid. That is very slightly true of all energy sources, but it's incredibly true for electricity. So as you can see on screen there, it's at the moment, it would be true to say in any typical day that the carbon emission from 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, so 1 unit of electricity, can be both 150 grams and 300 grams. And you could say both of those things on most days and they would both be true, because at some point in the day, they will have peaked up towards 300 grams and they will have dropped down towards 150 grams. That means depending on which of those figures you choose to believe is the one that you're drawing the power from, you will either double or halve your carbon footprint simply by a decision about which electricity source when you're using your electricity. And the graph you can see here is plotting 2019's carbon emissions per month. So each one of those lines is a day from each month of the year, and January is the top one, which was pretty grotty, and then the summer ones are the lower on the graph. In essence, what you see is a peak in the evening when the maximum demand is happening on the grid, a little trough during the daytime when the maximum generation from solar generation is happening, a little bit of a smaller peak in the morning, and the lowest levels overnight, typically when we have a chance of wind in the North Sea and up off Anglesey in North Wales. That is happening every day. And what we're doing at the moment is we're assuming that's not impacting how our homes and our buildings run and how they emit carbon. the right way to get to net zero is to actually understand that that's happening every day and to draw power from times which are low carbon, and then allow our properties to shift away from the times that are high carbon. And the more that the grid starts to move towards a higher proportion of renewable energy, be it photovoltaics or wind or similar, the more we're going to have a spiky generation period where peak demand is met by dirty electricity generation, if you will, and lower levels of demand are met by greener generation. So the ability to shift our homes is key to the success of delivering net zero. Demand isn't stable either, so when we draw power, peaks at different times to when the grid generates power. If anyone wants, there's some web links you can go and look. Don't just take my word for it. Go and look at any of these websites, or there's apps. You can look at what the grid carbon is at any time. And the key message to take away is that 1 kilowatt hour of electricity does not equal a fixed amount of CO2. The grid is also decarbonising, and in the last 15 years, it's roughly halved, to just over half the carbon footprint of the average kilowatt hour in the course of a year. And that is going to halve again in the next 10 years and will continue to go down towards 2050. But that doesn't mean it won't continue to fluctuate on a daily basis. So as you can see in regulations, we still talk about energy having carbon footprints up towards the 500 grams. In reality, we're somewhere down about the 200 grams, and in the grid in the 2030s is likely to be down towards the 100 grams. What that means is actually our future electricity carbon is going to be spiky like this, slowly trending down, but ultimately spiky every day between when there is low demand but high supply and when there is high supply but low demand. So the question there is, what's the right carbon factor to assume from our electricity? And ultimately, that's what we need to be able to factor into our decisions around building. And where we're currently not working well enough as a sector across all of the home nations is understanding that balancing when you draw power from the energy grids is absolutely key to ensuring the lower carbon footprint of the homes and the residents that live in those homes. So being able to shift when the demand is hitting the grid from when the resident draws their power is key to delivering cost-effective and pragmatic net zero. And as you can see by the diagram, it's effectively shifting the evening peak to happen, to draw the power from the grid at a time which is more suitable to the grid, while still allowing the residents to enjoy the evening peak power usage as they would put the oven on, put the telly on, whatever else it might be. That's picked up in the UK Green Building Council's definition of zero carbon. It's the text in red on the screen there. And that's one of the key things that we need to factor around defining net zero. So I'm conscious we can jump through these slides and you can go through them after the talk if you want at your leisure. So what I'll do here is jump forward, having made the point about grid linking homes and having the ability to have balancing within the homes, which could be as simple as hot water storage or more technological like battery storage. To get to net zero pragmatically, that's the key point to take away, factoring those in. What I will jump to the last couple of minutes of the time I've got is to explain the operational carbon, where the carbon comes from the home, and then how we can translate that into getting these homes down to net zero practically. So for a modern home, you will be looking at roughly a third impact between space heating, hot water, and plug-in appliances, and somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 tons of CO2 for carbon emissions from a typical home. This is a 3-bed, 5-person as an example. For an older home, you're likely to be emitting somewhere closer to 6 tons every year, and the majority of that is from space heating, hence historically why there's been a really big focus on fabric improvements, rightly so, a fabric improvement process. With those kinds of levels, there's been a focus on fabric, and we have popular assessment schemes which actually always look towards fabric as a measure. So if we look at where we are with our fabric assessment schemes, you've got the Building Regulations Compliance Scheme of SAP, Passive House, LETI, and then the old Code for Sustainable Homes. Net zero carbon is not what SAP is measuring. So for those of you looking at EPCs and expecting that to be a net zero measure, they are not the same thing. I haven't got time to dwell on that, but I'm sure we'll get some questions. Passive house is often flagged as being a solution that is net zero. It isn't. It is an extremely good solution for getting a low space heating demand, but it is not a metric for net zero. Letty hasn't come up. There we are. Oh, there it is, out of sequence. Letty is effectively a passive house solution, so it's the same answers as for passive house. And the old code for sustainable homes was the only one that actually covered unregulated or plug-in appliances. So it got closer, but again, still doesn't actually provide us a genuine measure of whether something is net zero. I'm sure we'll get some questions on that one. But so we don't really have a very good tool that allows us as an industry to measure what net zero carbon is. None of the tools are recognizing the need for grid-linked homes that can shift their demand to match when low carbon electricity is being delivered. That doesn't mean to say that the tools we've got aren't good for what they are specialized in. Passive House Planning Pack particularly being a good example of really good, accurate energy calculations for space heating. So there's a gap in the tools, but there's also a gap in the understanding of how we progress and what we can build. So lastly, I'll just run through very quickly before Mark tells me to jump off. What would you want to do if you were trying to deliver this? Well, first of all, we would always encourage everyone to remember that pick a date for when you want homes to be net zero. Many of you organizationally will have board level decisions that say we're going to achieve zero carbon by a certain year. If you use that as your starting point, you can actually start to model what the grid carbon looks like in that year, and we've done that with the Active Building Centre. Happy to share that. Once you've got your design year, you can start to look at what the carbon factors for the electricity in that year will look like. And at that basis, you can start to model your homes based on how they will perform at net zero in 2035 or 2040 or 2030 to suit. From that point, you then apply a mantra we always follow of reduce, balance, and generate. So reduce is minimize the, sorry, I'll do the zero carbon bit, I'll come on to reduce. So just to give you an idea of the impacts that you'll be talking about, practically speaking, if you pick 2022 as a zero carbon by target, you're probably talking spending 30 or 40K over your build cost for a typical home. If you pick 10 years later, you're going to be in the 15 to 20,000 uplift. And if you pick 20 years later, you're probably going to be in the 10 to 15, maybe even below 10, compared to current building regulations. And of course, important to remember, current building regulations are ratcheting up. So that cost difference is going to get smaller because the baseline acceptable level is moving up. But that's what we would estimate will be the uplifts for now based on a current regulatory baseline. Once you've picked your year to target, reduce, and I won't go through these in detail because I know I'm out of time, but that would be some idea of what you're likely to end up as a fabric standard and what you're likely to be looking around building as an envelope for the homes. Next would be reduce the impact of the services. That almost certainly means heat pumps. I'm sure I'm going to get a question on hydrogen because I've said oops goes hydrogen in the slides, but ultimately it does for residential properties. The energy demand is not high enough to justify it. And then you're looking into the balance side. So this is where we need to look at battery storage and thermal storage within the home. So the good old-fashioned hot water tank comes back and you should be looking to leave space in them for that. You will need some form of intelligent control to run all of this kit and not pass that burden onto the residents, because we've all seen decades of examples where these bits of kit have been handed to residents who frankly have far more interesting things to do than try and run a bit of kit in their home, so they fail at that point. And then lastly, some form of generation is likely to be needed on the home. So probably at the moment, some PV is the easiest win. And again, some figures on screen there as to what you might be looking for. So that's my rattle through. Remember overheating, construction carbon is going to be the thing for the latter part of this decade, but at the moment it's not really well enough defined. Environmental product declarations aren't quite robust enough yet, but if you want a rule of thumb, then probably use more timber. And then looking forward, the net zero operation in practice is how you'll need to deliver that with some form of intelligent management. So that's my synopsis of what you probably want to go and build for new builds and retrofits. Get as close to that as practical. And I think I've overrun. So there we are. Mark, back to you.
And you have, yes. Thank you very much indeed, Andy. We'll rattle straight on, I think. Our next presentation is from Sarah Schofield from ADRA. You're in Anglesey, Sarah. Oh, you're on mute though. We can't hear you.
Yes, I am in Anglesey. Yeah, and I don't have to drive home on a Sunday anymore. Right, so I'll just share my screens. That'll work. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, so what I've obviously not got a lot of time, so I'm happy to pick up with anybody separately if you want more detail. But I just wanted to give a flavour of what ADRA have done so far with our decarbonisation strategy. I think first up on this next slide, if I can get that to change. There we go. Why we're doing this work. There's a whole host of reasons. That's just typical, isn't it? Somebody knocks on the door just as you're about to speak and the dog starts barking. But really the main thing that I wanted to talk about is sort of ADRA's approach to this and how we're going about this work. So very much about a sort of collective one team approach across the organisation. We don't see this as an assets task. We see it as a sort of whole organisation, very much about the customers and support for customers, rather than just doing something to units as they can quite often be referred to. So the approach that we took, we started off with some training, and we did this carbon literacy training, which sounds quite dull, but actually it was really, really good training. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for us all, really. And we, after spending a day looking at climate change issues, it sort of really gave a big drive for everybody that we need to do something about this, and we can't be waiting till 2050 to make a start. It's just going to be far too late, which is partly why we've got this 2030 target. Because we said, you could put a target 2035, 2040, and nobody will do anything until 2039. So that's why we've set the 2030 target, is to give that burning platform. And, we've got to make a start on this stuff now, because it's going to take a long time to deliver this. And I'm sure we will still be very busy in 2030. I don't expect that we will have, completed everything. But we then rearranged the training for the board, and again that was a bit of a game changer, because very difficult to get your board members to spend a day doing something like carbon literacy, but they did. We managed to get the course condensed down for them, and that really helped to, a lot of board members, they're really just keen on the finances, how much is it going to cost and things like that. So this training was really useful to sort of overcome that sort of just financial perspective on the decisions. We'd already drafted our own strategy, and then we found out about the Carbon Trust, and I just thought that just gives it a whole new level of credibility if you've got someone like the Carbon Trust working with you. And I can say they were incredibly helpful. They helped to demystify some of the things that we would have spent hours wrestling with. And how to sort of go about it in stages. And we think of it as a very iterative process, that you haven't got all the answers to this, but you've got to start, and more information you learn as you're going along, and it becomes clearer. So very much about a plan. So we got the board to agree the strategy and the target of 2030, and we've got this detailed carbon management plan, which I'll come back to, but that's a live document that we just keep updating. We've got a corporate project structure for decarb, so it's like from very senior level right through to all the support officers, and we do have a dedicated member of staff who leads on decarb. And I always say that's made a big difference, really, having Gwen, somebody who is moving things forward while everybody else is, dealing with lots of other priorities. So she came as a graduate trainee, and I'd say her role has been fundamental in making some really good progress. And then we have this regional group that we set up. We felt that, if we work on this just as ADRA, we're not going to get very far. But if we work with the other housing associations and local authorities in the area, we will learn from them, they will learn from us. And that's been a really useful group. we started, when we were developing the strategy with the Carbon Trust, we went through the process of baselining all the emissions, and there are 3 different types of emissions that you go through, and you start with the scope 1 and the scope 2. They're the things that are easier to measure, and then you leave scope 3 for a bit later. That was helpful to us, because I think if the Carbon Trust had not said that, we'd have been scratching our heads with things that we didn't need to worry about yet. So we got our baseline, and we've now got 3 good years of data, and hopefully, you know, one of the good things that's come out of COVID is that people are not driving miles all around North Wales clocking up carbon emissions. So it's something we need to keep hold of in many ways, and we do expect when we get our this year's results that we've made a big dent in these figures. But being across quite a big geography with some really poor housing, you know, older housing is a particular challenge. Again, some of the things that the Carbon Trust helped us to work out was like, what's the roadmap of, you know, forecasting. We haven't got all the detail of this, but we, you know, we understand now that a percentage of the emissions will be decarbonised anyway because of the grid decarbonisation. Then there's the element that ADRA will need to do as interventions, and then there is a level of offsetting that will be needed. Again, I think the Carbon Trust helps us with that, with understanding that offsetting is a very legitimate thing to do, and it has to be part of the strategy. And then we've got this roadmap as well, which, you know, these have all been just useful documents just to set out what we expect to do in each year. But this is just a guide, really, that obviously some of these things have started earlier, some of these things will come in later. And we're just making as much progress as we can on each of the elements. Our approach to it is through this project management, really, of having, we've got a corporate programme board, there's a carbon reduction programme board, and then there are subgroups looking at things like the stock decarbonisation, the finance, procurement and fleet, behaviour change in communities, and then land and buildings development. And this seems to be working well for us in terms of delegating tasks to teams and getting the ownership across the organisation and people reporting back progress, because it can't all happen at one level, can it? It's got to be that everybody's progressing the agenda to make such a big step change. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, this is my final slide, is the regional collaboration. That's been incredibly useful to us. We've been getting guest speakers in to talk to us from various organisations, so that what we're doing, we understand the context of what, you know, Natural Resources Wales or the Welsh Energy Service are doing, what the Welsh Government are doing. We've been sharing knowledge. The local authorities have made a lot of progress that the housing associations haven't, so that's been useful to understand their experience. And in particular, this group has helped us to identify funding opportunities. So the Zero collaboration that Andy leads on is over 30 housing associations that have put together a collective bid to Welsh Government for a huge pot of funding. ADRA have had something like £750,000 from that fund this year. We wouldn't have even known about this collaboration, I don't think, if we'd not had this regional group. And then there are other funding streams coming up, and we're starting to get approached by consultants who've already got funding, who want to work with us. And then one of the things that we've looked at, not all the bids that we've put in have been successful, but we have managed to get some smaller pots of money for charging points and electric vehicles. And we have also started to look at hydrogen vehicles because of the hydrogen hub that Rishi Sunak is funding in Holyhead. And as Andy said, it's probably years away, that kind of thing, but we're quite keen to have some legacy projects, some big community energy projects as part of our, not just looking at our buildings, but something that you can say, ADRA made that happen. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of how we've approached the subject. And we don't have all the answers, but we're working very hard to pull it all together. And having worked on recycling schemes back in the 90s when nobody recycled, and 20 years later everybody's recycling, I do think it is possible to make these big step changes, but there's got to be a really strong drive at all levels to get there. Thank you.
That was really, really impressive. I'm really impressed by what ADRA are doing, and some terrific slides there, which are all going to be available to everybody after this from the CHIC website. Do pop some questions in the Q&A. No one has yet got a single question. I presume that our panelists are just answering every conceivable question on all of this. We are now going to have our third presentation. This is from Emma Harvey, who is the Programme Director at the Green Finance Institute. Over to you, Emma.
Cheers, thanks very much, Mark, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. Now, what I'm going to use the next sort of 9 to 10 minutes to chat through is an introduction to the emerging green finance landscape and how this is trying to help tackle the built environment and decarbonise it. And I'll go into some of the exciting solutions that are being developed by the wider market, but also by the Green Finance Institute's Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings. So to start us off, I think I'll take a step back and say, when the Paris Agreement was signed back in 2015, it set the trajectory for where policy and governments were going to be going in terms of decarbonising the economy. And this really started to trickle down into businesses, into consumers, and very much into the public awareness. Now, I think you've had to have had your head in the sand over the last couple of years not to see in the growing climate activism. We've had Extinction Rebellion, we've had Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough driving the public desire to decarbonise. However, everybody on this call probably also knows that the reality of decarbonising our economy is tricky and challenging. And one of the big challenges in particular is the significant amounts of investment that is required to actually achieve net zero. And so this is where the emerging green finance market has come around. Now, we at the Green Finance Institute view green finance in two lenses. You have greening finance and financing green. Greening finance is around financial institutions appropriately managing the risks related to the changing climate. These can be physical risks from our changing climate, but also transition risks from policies and legislation coming in order to actually help us decarbonise. So the finance sector has really picked up this agenda and is increasingly reporting on disclosures. We are establishing taxonomies, and we're delighted to say today that the Green Finance Institute is hosting the Secretariat for the UK taxonomy work and for the TNFD as well. And it's all around bolstering market integrity and the managing of risks appropriately. Now, the flip side of the coin is financing green, which is around getting money to move towards real economy outcomes and real economy projects. So this is getting money going towards those wind turbines, energy efficient buildings, zero carbon cars. And this requires financial innovation. It requires collaboration across sectors that have previously been disjointed and unjoined. And it requires education and engagement, not just of the finance sector's customers and clients, but also of bankers themselves to become literate in climate language. Now, I thought it was worthwhile giving a quick overview of what green finance is, because it is going to be critical for helping decarbonise our built environment. The UK Committee on Climate Change's 6th carbon budget estimated that £360 billion is going to be needed to decarbonise the UK's building stock, 250 billion of which is needed to decarbonise our homes. And I think most people on this call will be well aware that operational and embodied carbon are significant contributors to the UK's overall emissions. So there's a huge investment need, and if you compare the 250 billion that's required to decarbonise homes against the tens of billions that we've spent to tackle COVID, I think it becomes quite clear that the public purse alone is not going to be able to actually fund the wide-scale retrofitting and decarbonisation of our buildings. We need the private finance sector to be able to come into this space and to come into this space at scale. And that means being able to generate commercially attractive returns while delivering an environmentally positive outcome. So to try and help stimulate this market, the Green Finance Institute, which was set up a couple of years ago by the UK government and the City of London Corporation, established the Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings. The coalition has been running for 18 months now and brings together over 320 individuals from all sectors of the economy. We have bankers and asset managers, we have people from the property and energy sectors, property developers, people from civil society, NGOs, local and national government. We have a really broad mix. And the journey we've been on through the coalition, and which we're now starting to repeat at the Green Finance Institute with road transport, has been to initially look at the market, and we focused on the residential property market, and break it down into segments: owner-occupiers, private renters and social renters, and drill down into the genuine barriers that those different groups experience and face when trying to retrofit their property. And then with this rich picture of the barriers and levers that those different homeowners and property owners face, we designed a portfolio of over 30 theoretical financial solutions and data enablers that could help to overcome those barriers. And for the past almost year now, and going forwards, we have been actively developing the most viable of these solutions, providing an innovation platform that will help create new markets, establish the enabling conditions for finance to flow, and creating and sharing best practice across the industry. So what do some of these solutions look like? I'm just going to pick out a few today from the ones we're actively developing. And the first one I'll point to is our Green Home Finance Principles. Now, some of you on this call will be aware of green mortgages, which is a new and emerging type of mortgage where homeowners are incentivized to either retrofit or purchase an energy efficient property through various different features of the loan, whether that's additional borrowing capacity, lower interest rates, or being provided informational support. The Green Home Finance Principles, which were launched by the Green Finance Institute last year, provide a consistent, transparent process methodology for financial institutions to actually launch green mortgage products and to avoid greenwashing. It outlines 4 core pillars that any green mortgage or retrofit loan product should adhere to, so that you as a borrower have confidence that those funds genuinely are going towards something green. And we now have over 30% of the mortgage market by balance sheet signed up to the principles, either with a live product or launching a live product soon that meets these principles. And we have further interest coming down the line. The second product I'd like to talk about, or financial solution I'd like to talk about, is property assessed clean energy finance, or what we're increasingly calling property linked finance. Now, when you take out a mortgage or a loan, that financing is linked to you as a person. And so if you sell your property, your home, you have to repay your mortgage. Property assessed clean energy finance, which is a well-established financing model in the US, differs. The financing is actually linked to a property. So when you move property, you don't have to continue paying for repaying financing that you took out to retrofit your property, but you're no longer getting the economic benefit, i.e. the energy savings. Whoever is living in that property and benefiting from those retrofit measures is the person who is liable or obligated to make those repayments. We've seen this model be highly successful in the US. It's mobilized over $9 billion towards retrofitting in just a handful of years. And we are currently exploring at the Institute how this can be translated into the UK, and we'll be publishing a report next month that outlines some very interesting results from a large-scale consumer study we did to understand UK consumer sentiments around this type of product. The final one I'll mention today is building renovation passports. And I would really recommend having a look at some of the work that Andy's doing as well in this space. But building renovation passports are a digital tool that provide very granular information on how a property is performing in terms of energy and energy efficiency today, and then provides a granular, practical, step-by-step roadmap on how you can decarbonize your property over time, ideally with linkages into the supply chain and into the finance sector. The Green Finance Institute will be publishing an industry framework on building renovation passports in the next month, which outlines what good practice looks like in this sector to try and ensure that this market, which will grow rapidly, is robust and has strong integrity. And so the final little bit I'll just mention today is, this sounds like the CEIB is an innovation platform for projects and financial solutions, But it also provides a bridge for dialogue between industry and government. It's created a community of best practice for financial institutions to feel safe in innovating in financial areas. And it's also amplifying and working with other initiatives, whether that's with UK GBC's Accelerator Cities, or with FloodRe's Property Flood Resiliency Roundtable, or even with Zero Homes Optimised Retrofit Project, which again, we would very much say have a look at. But beyond that, we are also starting to explore how the coalition model can be replicated in Europe to help bring this best practice into other international markets. So that's a whistle stop through green finance, how it can be applied to the built environment, and what the Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings is doing. If you want to learn more, please do have a look at our website, and happy to take any questions at the end. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. And time now for our final presentation from Sarah, another Sarah, Sarah Davey, Head of Development at CHIC. Off you go.
Thank you very much, Mark. Sorry, I'm going to be one of those really annoying people that has to say next slide, please, because I'm not that computer literate, I'm afraid. So apologies in advance. So I'm Sarah Davey. I'm Head of Development Services for CHIC, which means I head up Build Smart, which is the new build element of CHIC. So I cover anything to do with new build development, and obviously the very hot topic of carbon reduction at the moment. Next slide, please. So how Build Smart works is we basically work collaboratively with our members to negotiate cost savings by bulk buying materials, legal services, to achieve sort of substantial cost savings for our members. We have entered into some long-term contracts. We're very sort of keen to promote MMC and timber frame. We believe that is the way forward. And as a consequence of that, we've entered into some long-term contracts with modular and timber frame manufacturers over a 15-year period, offering both turnkey solutions and supply only. We believe that volume is the key, particularly with modern methods of construction. A lot of RPs are keen to dip their toe in the water with MMC, but they want to do it on a pilot scheme, and so the costs are obviously more and not very attractive, and so it's a vicious circle. And so what I'm trying to do is get people to sort of take that dive into MMC in order to benefit from the cost savings of volume building, and also the benefits of MMC and what it's got to offer. We also, as part of our package, we've just recently acquired a dynamic purchasing system, which enables RPs to be OG compliant, but it's a lot quicker, more cost-effective route to market than going through the traditional tendering system. We've had a lot of recent inquiries on it, and it's working really well, and we're turning sort of contracts round or tendering processes round in between 8 and 12 weeks. So really, really good timing. We've got a tried and tested material supply chain, substantial savings for members between sort of £2,000 and £3,000 a plot. And we are sort of fully compliant. Next slide, please. So the big buzzword at the moment is zero carbon, low carbon, and a lot of people I speak to, they know they've got to achieve it, but they don't know what it is, and they sort of pick up on the word net zero carbon, and then they look at their budget and realise they can't actually afford it. Passive house, or we'll have a bit of passive house, but it's not what a lot of people don't understand is it's not the final product. It's a construction journey. It's about how many site toilets you've got. It's a tick box, as Andy said, over a period of a year or more, in order to achieve the final sort of sign off for sort of zero carbon. What I'm trying to do as an interim measure, moving towards this net zero carbon target, is sort of persuade people that you don't have to go the whole hog just yet. You can build more cost effectively to prevent retrofits in just, you know, really cost effective solutions as easily as making changes to the build method. So go MMC, where, you know, our partners, I did a factory visit on one of our partners last week. None of their waste that comes out of their factory goes to landfill, it's all recycled. So that in itself achieves low carbon, and changing the heating system. So for very little more money, you can put air source heat pumps in, use PV, and achieve a higher EPC SAP calculation rating. Next slide. So how we can help you on this low carbon journey, because it is a journey, is with the partners that we've got. We've negotiated, because we've entered into these long-term contracts with them, we've negotiated sort of cost savings, and we've got sort of fixed prices on a range of standard house types that we can offer you. So if you came to us and said, right, here's a site, there's 6 2-bed 4-person houses, 5 3-bed 5-person houses, we've got costs based on various specifications that I can just give to you and say, okay, assuming no abnormal ground conditions, this is the sort of build cost you will achieve, or you're looking at. And then from there, it's a bit like going into a car showroom. You get a cost for the basic model, and then you add your alloy wheels and your heated seats and everything, and it's the same principle with housing. We give you a basic cost of a timber frame or an MMC, and then you change it as appropriate. And the benefits of off-site manufacture is less waste. So as I say, no waste goes to landfill, less carbon using sustainable materials, less defects. It's a factory environment construction. So you're not open to the elements that, you know, you can build all year round. So comes out with less defects, lower running costs, better insulation, cheaper heating bills for the end user, less neighbourhood disruption because you on site sort of a lot quicker, you're in and out a lot quicker. Foundations are more simple, and obviously earlier rental income if you're looking to retain the properties, because they're built in six months as opposed to 12 months. Next slide. So these are some of our MMC partners. We've got Impact Capital in Peterborough, MAR in Hull. Both of those do low-rise, fully turnkey if needed, or supply only. And then you've got low and high-rise in Telford. Impact also do high-rise now, and they have, they were telling us in our factory visit last week, they are bringing out, or they partnered with a new company, and they now have the ability to do MMC up to 48 stories. So that's fairly impressive. Next slide. These are our other MMC partners. These are the original ones that we partnered that just do supply only. They don't do turnkey. But again, very supportive, very knowledgeable about carbon reduction, low carbon, and they all have solutions to how you can achieve this depending on your budget. And all are willing to sort of spend time, set up meetings to discuss your requirements and work with you. Next. So why CHIC? So with PCR 2015 procurement compliance, we've got known costs that we can give you. So very quickly you can establish whether a site works or not. We can provide substantial material supply cost savings, and we're also working now with our MMC partners, and we are achieving material savings for them. We can buy materials cheaper than them, which further reduces the whole MMC cost. And we do this through collaborative efficiencies, so volume buy-in basically. Next. So CHIC is free to join. We charge a transaction fee on a sliding scale. Obviously, the higher the bill cost, the lower the fee, and that is more than recovered in the cost savings. Next. And that's me. Any questions?
Well, I can tell you that as of now, there is not a single question in the Q&A box.
Oh, good.
But we have, so we've solved all of it. But I have a few, and we have got 10 minutes or so for us to talk through some of this. Andy, if I can come back to you, actually, I mentioned in my introduction, and indeed, I think it was Sarah who also mentioned the collaboration that you're involved with social landlords, and I wrote down optimized retrofit pathfinder, not understanding what any of those words could conceivably mean in that order, but can you just explain a little bit more about that collaboration, and you know, whether in fact it would have you know, sort of potential across the UK?
Absolutely, it's got potential across the UK, so yeah, very happy to. What we're doing, centred in Wales and supported by Welsh Government, is we're working with I think 28 in the first year, but that's already expanding beyond 30 social landlords. Now, although every social landlord faces subtly different problems and stockholding situations, and every resident, of course, is unique in their own way of inhabiting their home, there are some familiar problems that run across all of these, and typically that's the way to assess the property, to understand how the measures that can be applied to that property can be sequenced, can be coordinated over time, and to allow delivering net zero to become a kind of enhanced planned maintenance program. So we're scaling with absolutely all of those social landlord partners to build the tool sets and technical support to allow the partners to take their homes on that journey. And it is what we call a pathway to zero that has a number of stepping stones along the way. So rather than what we've seen with some of the schemes happening with perhaps get a bit more national coverage because they're closer to Westminster, perhaps I could cynically say, some of the schemes are sort of tearing out kit which is halfway through its lifespan. And what we're saying with optimized retrofit is actually this is a marathon, not a sprint. Look at this as a program for over 10 or 15 years, and those will be driven by organizational goals. Look at replacement of boilers, look at replacement of windows, look at upgrading roofs in line with your planned maintenance, but do that with a view to how you get that home to net zero. And that's we've got nearly 1,800 homes being retrofitted across Wales this year. We're looking to double that, if not triple that, in the next financial year. Sorry, this year, but probably running through into the next financial year. And alongside that, what we're doing is providing the technical support and the digital tools. We're working with CHIC to help provide a dynamic procurement system to help give access to markets. We're engaged with Green Finance Institute around how we can help leverage in private finance. And ADRA are one of the shining examples of really getting this message, and one of the social housing partners working with us to do that. So it's absolutely the beginning of the groundswell to try and get optimized, to get retrofit optimized through optimized retrofit. But the point in my talk was around the core of this is building with a view to the future. So this is understanding how these homes can work in harmony with the energy grids, rather than looking over our shoulder at how we used to build with a view to the past.
Yes, no, I was very interested in that, and maybe Sarah Schofield, I could bring you in on this. Andy's big point is that we need to be sort of using electricity at the times when it's using less carbon, and that makes sense. In terms of your housing provider, have you made any steps towards this? Are you thinking about it, or is this all brand new in terms of, you know, expanding your hot water systems, or looking at sort of battery storage, or whatever it might be, so that you can ensure that your properties have electricity that is as least carbon damaging as possible?
I think the whole subject is something that you just learn new things every day, especially if you're a housing background or environmental health officer, which not many people are experts in carbon, are they, in carbon reduction, working in housing associations.
We'll all be experts.
No, yeah, I keep saying I'm going to go on mastermind about the terminology because I learn so much every day. But I think, honestly, it's just such a steep learning curve, and every day we're finding out about new things and thinking, right, we need to build that in. And I suppose choosing which are the things that are the main thing that ADRA are working on now is the hybrid heat pumps, which Welsh Government are very keen to try. But we have quite an old stock here. the other thing, you know, is about growing the in-house workforce, and creating local employment is a big issue in North Wales. So very much what we want to do is about, you know, growing the company to do this work internally as well. And then we don't have a lot of high-rise flats and things like that, but we do have quite a few sheltered accommodation, and some blocks of flats. So the approach there will be quite different to the houses. And like I said, there's some heat recovery schemes. There's a lot of community energy production in the area. And it really is that. It's just about time and capacity to, you know, where we're going to start and which projects and ideas do we take forward.
Yeah. In fact, if I can come to the other Sarah Davey on some of that, I'm sure. Well, we know that in outside the sort of residential sector, perhaps a lot of people are looking at heat pumps. They're looking at, you know, rainwater collection. They're looking at solar panels and all of that kind of stuff. How can CHIC help, you know, developers and builders and others, you know, who are interested in that part of the equation, you know, get the right products in?
Well, we obviously work with a number of suppliers, and what we find, obviously, we've got over 140 members, so we work with them on specking up their houses. And what we find is most people tend to have a go-to of, say, a boiler or whatever. So what we would do for the air source heat pump, we would look to see the most popular one, and then obviously if we could channel people to sort of go down that route, then we could achieve better cost savings, say all going to a Mitsubishi than, say, half going for Valiant, half going for Mitsubishi. But also with air source heat pump, because they're so in demand at the moment, sometimes you don't have a choice because of the availability. So it all depends on the timing. But you know, anything to do with materials, we've got some bulk buying power, that the cost savings we pass on to our members.
Emma, I want to bring you back in. You're talking about financing green and greening finance, and I suppose, you know, one of the difficulties that we've touched on a little bit is the way of actually measuring carbon, and particularly embodied carbon. And I wonder, from your perspective, looking at, you know, trying to sort of speed up the process, but also doing it properly. We do have to think about the carbon that's actually stored in the raw materials, and have a really good understanding of that, do we not?
Absolutely, and I think we've seen, you know, from the UK Committee on Climate Change right through to the World Green Building Council, the importance of you know, constructing properties that have low embodied carbon. Where the finance sector can play a role is in helping to enable and nudge clients in that direction. So with developers, we're starting to see an increasing interest in a particular type of financing tool called a sustainability linked loan, where the borrower, if they meet particular sustainability targets, can have a small reduction on the interest rate on their loan. But if they significantly miss their targets, there is a small increase in the interest rate on their loan, which on multi-billion-pound facilities can be quite a significant amount. Now, we've seen some developers start to, I think Great Portland Estates was one of the first to say, actually, one of our targets is going to be trying to decrease the embodied carbon in our new developments. So I think we're starting to see the finance sector move into this, but I'll probably echo Andy's comments of saying it feels like focuses on operational emissions at the moment, and embodied is people are suddenly going to realize that embodied is important later on in the year. The final bit I'll say is just, we also need to remember about climate resiliency. There's overheating, there's flood resiliency. We need to make sure that these retrofits are also making properties climate resilient.
Oh, that's a very, very good point. I saw Sarah, I don't know, your pen was raised. I don't know whether you had a point you wanted to make on that. No, you definitely didn't, which is just as well, because we have come pretty much to the end of our session, and indeed the end of our conference. Thank you to our panel, to Andy and Emma, Sarah S and Sarah D. Thank you to all of those who've joined me for the 3 webinars this afternoon. It's been a really fascinating, and I hope for you too, rewarding CHIC webinar day. a virtual replacement, what should have been the annual conference. But the good news is, if you haven't heard already, that the rearranged date, Wednesday the 17th of November in the real world, glory be. All today's virtual sessions are available for download from the CHIC website, where you can also find details of registering for that November conference. That's it for now. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the autumn. Until then, take care and goodbye.